Okay, from an application security perspective, basically what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make sure that we only give access to the people who need to have access into certain areas of the database within ServiceNow, just enough permission for them to conduct their work, right? So when we're talking about security within ServiceNow applications, right, the first thing that will need to happen, there's a certain number of layers within that govern the access that an individual may have to the different locations of the database. So when you first display your ServiceNow instance, and you go ahead and you log into your ServiceNow, what will happen is that first we're going to identify the user. Does this username and password exist in our database? If the answer is yes, then we move on to the next question. Does this person belong to a group? If the answer is yes, we say, okay, what role does that group contains, or what role does that group has? So those three things need to happen. They happen rather quickly for you, because you just kind of type in your username, right, and your password, and it's almost instant. But in the background, there's these things that are happening, right? These levels of authentication for the purpose of security are taking place, right? Is this user in the database? Yes. Is this user part of the group? Yes. What role does that group has? Because remember, what we do is we create users and we drop users into groups, and then we assign roles to groups, right? That's basically how we're supposed to administer user accounts or user administration. And then once we have determined that this user belongs to a group that has specific roles, then we can figure out which applications and which modules are to be displayed. Why? Because if I'm looking at my instance right now, I have all these, if I go to the all applications button here, I have all the applications, right? Because I'm logged in as an administrator. But let's say I impersonate another user, and I don't, maybe David Liu is definitely a regular out here. Let me see what David Liu has. So if I am impersonating David Liu, right? I'm logging in as David Liu. I may not have access to all the applications that I had as an administrator, because remember that when and actually David Liu does have quite a few. Maybe that might not have been a good. Let me try somebody else just for the sake of doing this the right way. Okay, we're gonna go with Adela Cervantes. How about that?
Okay.
Let's see what Adela Cervantes has. I haven't actually never impersonated this user, so I'm just taking a wild guess here that she doesn't have all the privileges, right? So yeah, as you can see, her applications there's still a lot of them, but even the homepage for her is different. See, it takes her to the self-service, right? Why? Because we authenticate as Adela Cervantes. Adela Cervantes doesn't have administrator rights. I don't even see incidences here. There's knowledge, service catalog. I think most of the applications are here. But in most cases, you're not going to see all these applications, right? People will have maybe 5 or 6, maybe 10 applications in here, because that's all they need to conduct their work.
Okay.
And so that's what we're going to determine here in the user interface. What applications and what modules are available to who, right? If you are the knowledge manager for an organization, well, guess what? When they create an instance of ServiceNow for you, or when they create a user account, they better make sure that you have access to this area right here, right? The knowledge, the knowledge application, because you're gonna be working within this. This is gonna be your lab table, if you will, right? This is where you're gonna be dealing with all this different knowledge, right? And then in fact, you know what? It's not even displaying the knowledge here is not displaying the modules. So as you can see, Adela doesn't have access to all the modules for knowledge. She has access to the knowledge. You see that?
Yeah.
But it's not the same as if I click on incidents. Yeah, see how it doesn't have all the options that you would have as an administrator, right? So if I go back and I impersonate myself again as a system administrator, notice that even the color, even my colors on my user interface are different, right? Because when I get authenticated into the system, the system go, oh, this guy is this guy is an administrator. So if we go to incidents, if I can never find them, right? If I go to incidents here, notice how when I click on incidents, all these options open for me.
Right.
These options did not open for Adela, right? Because she doesn't have the permissions, and so from a security perspective, we're thinking, okay, first we're gonna identify the user, what group, what role. Then once we've done that, then we're going to display the allow user interface applications and modules, right? Why? Because the applications and modules are governed by roles. Everybody who has a different role will have a different display or a different list of applications that's pertinent to the kind of work that they're supposed to be doing, right? And then your third level of security would be the database access, because you could have been authenticated, you have a role in the system, you have access to certain applications and modules, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have access to all the tables, right? Maybe you don't need to have access to the problem table. I wouldn't want to have access to the problem table because I don't want any problems in my life. But maybe you have access to incidents, right? Because you're gonna be working help desk, and so you need to have access to the tables that you need access to in order to conduct your work, right? And so some of these things may be governed by your role, but they may also be governed by global system properties, whatever has been set from the get-go for executive administration of ServiceNow, where we're saying, well, nobody should have access to this side of the table, right? Only system administrators, or nobody should have access to this entire area. So we're just going to customize these tables, just like what we were doing earlier with customizing forms and tables and headings, right? And so we create those default representations of ServiceNow so that every user will have access to only certain areas of ServiceNow, and if you don't have enough role or enough privilege or permission to access those areas of the database, then you will not have access to the database. You will be denied access because you don't have enough permission. So where do I go to set the controls? Well, you go to System Properties in the Application Navigator, then you go to Security, and then in Security Controls, you go to System Security Access Control or System Security High Security Settings, right? And those are pretty much the areas that you're gonna be navigating when you're dealing with modifying the accessibility of individuals into the different areas of the ServiceNow database. What is an access control? That is a security rule defined and set at the low level, so at the record, right? And at the column level, so at the field, and it is executed when attempting to access any ServiceNow table, right? So if I have an ACL in place, somebody may be able to see the list of records but may not be able to click on any of those records and open them, right? Because the rule is down at the ground level, right? At the raw level, the raw as in a record, right? And so maybe that person doesn't have the ability to modify, to do inline editing, for example. Why? Because that person is not an administrator. That person only has read-only permission. So access controls are defined by roles expressions, conditional expressions, which is what you would enter when you're making your modifications and adjustments in ServiceNow, in scripts. Okay, what is an access control list? An ACL is a set of rules basically that control what data users can access and how they can access it. Right? Because we don't want to give people access to everything. So we're only going to give them access to a certain area of the form. We want them to fill out that form, but they may not have the ability to move forward from there because that's not part of their role. All they have to do is create an incident. They don't have to enter all these other data. Right? We'll let managers do that. Somebody else may be responsible. That may be part of a workflow, right? Where we're notifying some manager that they need to approve this specific assignment, or it needs to be tasked to somebody in a specific group, right? So an ACA rules require users to pass a set of requirements in order to gain access to a particular set of data, right? So that's basically what we're doing, is we're putting some roadblocks in place, and in these roadblocks we are asking people, show me your identification. Do you have permission to access this area of the database? If you do not have the permissions, then you will not be allowed. Okay? And that's in essence what we're trying to do, is basically getting down to the nitty-gritty of who has access to what part of the database.
Okay.
Now, if we have a wildcard in a access control, then that means that that rule applies to all the fields in the selected table. Okay, except for whatever exception within that rule that we write, right? When you get to do the lab, this will make a little bit more sense. Right now, I think what I really want you to understand is the concept of what an access control list is.
Okay.
And in essence, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create some roadblocks so that when a user is trying to come into certain areas of the database, we're going to authenticate at that level, at the role level, right? At the record level. Does this person have permission to access this record, right? Maybe that record is a priority one, and individuals with certain roles may not have access to priority one records, right? So same thing here, right? With the access, this is a little bit much, to be honest with you, but in any case, behind this contextual security, you can have, for a field or an entire row, you can have a number of things, right? A workflow from a security perspective, right? A user is requesting access, for example, here to a record object. Well, let's look at the rules. Does this person have access to the table.field, or to the parent table.field, or to wildcard.field? I mean, what part of the table are we trying to secure? And if there is a match, if there's no match, then we go further, right? Then do we say, okay, does the ACL name matches the table? Does the ACL matches the parent table? Does it match any table? Right? Because what we're trying to do is basically move on to where we either allow access to the user, right, by evaluating their permissions down at the row and the table level, or we are going to deny based on whether this user has passed or failed the different requirements for accessing that part of the database based on their roles. Whew, let me grab some to drink real quick.
Okay.
Okay, there are certain areas that you do not have access even as an administrator. Such as, for example, when you're trying to write access control lists. And this we've been talking about the ability to elevate your role. Even as a system administrator, you do not have access to writing ACLs. You need to elevate your permissions, okay, to security underscore admin, right? And I think we've done this quite a bit, right? If I'm a system administrator, I pretty much have access to a lot, but not to everything. But if I go here to this drop down menu and I go to elevate roles, this is a UI 16, and I select security underscore admin. Again, what's really important to note here is that I'm going to be granted modification access to high security settings, right? This will allow me the ability to modify the ACL, the access control list. But one thing also that is important to note here is that the security underscore admin role is only good for the duration of this session. So if I close my browser and I log out and then I log back in, I'm now gonna have a security underscore admin role. I'm gonna be a regular system administrator. Okay, so you can think of a security administrator as a super administrator, has access to really everything, right? But only for the duration of this session. Once I've elevated my role, okay, and notice how this little lock appears here saying it's unlocked. It's unlocked, right? Very similar to the little icon that appears on UI 15, the Fuji release. But this lock is like all the way over here in the Fuji release. But basically, what we're saying is, okay, I've elevated my privileges. Now I can go ahead and go into the security administration and start making modifications to the access control list, right? And so again, we're trying to keep things tidy up. We only want to give users enough permission to conduct their work, and a lot of times this can be a toggle, right, between the users and the security manager or administrator, because people think that the administrator is trying to stop them from conducting their work effectively, and the security administrator thinks that these people are trying to access areas of the database that they're not supposed to be accessing because of security reasons, right? They don't have the clearance to be accessing that information. And you know what a perfect example is, Civil, is that we were just given some information from Robert Half to preload into our instances, but they were not able to give us all the information because we're not employees of Robert Half. We don't have a disclosure agreement. You know, we don't have a non-disclosure agreement, rather. And so there were some legalities with giving us all kinds of information about their database, right? So they're only going to give us database that pertains to the United States because of legality purposes, right? And those legalities have to do with accessibility, right? We shouldn't have access to this database,
Right.
because it may contain information that's sensitive, right? That can put at risk
Right.
sensitive personal information of certain individuals, and we as users don't necessarily have the documentation necessary or the roles necessary, right, within the organization to be able to have access to that part of the database. So it is a big deal for sure.
So, but that being said, so are they giving us some dummy information then instead?
Well, it's not really dummy. It's real information, but it is information we need to load onto our one instance, maybe the leader's instance.
Right.
Yeah, so in your case, I think you're working with Dale and Manny
And Kim, yeah.
and Kim. Okay, so Manny should create user accounts for you guys in his instance,
Yeah, he direct.
and email you the URL, the login name and password,
Yeah, we already did that.
and give you. He already did that. Good. You see that? So he's already a step ahead, right? So now you have administrator rights. You can go into his instance and you can start building, your own import.
Trying to figure out what I might be missing, and then I'll just send you an email. You can just respond by Sunday.
Okay. All right. That works.
I do have a question
you're
on
okay
the
with that.
capstone. I was looking at module 7, and I was